Alright guys, so for the first unit of geometry, these are the SOL questions that have come from previous exams, previously released SOLs, and you're going to see these throughout the entire curriculum. I'll usually give these SOL packets to you at the beginning of the quarter or the beginning of the unit, but for this one, since it's the beginning of the school year, we're not going to work on this until, right now. So for question 1, notice how this is the first lesson that we did, language of logic. It says, consider the following statements. P represents the sum of two angles is 90 degrees, and Q represents the two angles are complements. Now, you don't have to know mathematically what that actually means. It says, which of the following is a symbolic representation of the statement? If two angles are not complements, so that is Q, but that's the opposite of Q, then the sum of two angles is not 90 degrees. So once again, that's P, but that's the opposite of P. So that's how you would write it in logical form, which is the same as A. Don't worry about on the bottom. For those of you who have used GradeCam before, we're not using it for this unit, but we will be using it for future units. Okay, but you would put your answer right there. For question 2, it says, if the conditional statement, if you have a laptop, then you have a computer, is represented by P, then Q, which means that the hypothesis is P, and the conclusion is Q. What is the symbolic representation of if you have a computer, then you do not have a laptop? So the hypothesis of this one is you have a computer, which is the same thing as Q. Then you do not have a laptop, which is very similar to P, but it's opposite because it uses the word not. So this right here is going to be Q, then not P, which is going to be A. For number 3, it says, let P represent x squared equals 21, and let Q represent x is not a whole number. Which is a representation of the statement below? If x is a whole number, which is very similar to Q, but it's the opposite because it uses the word not, so I'm going to put the squiggly line, then x squared, this means is not equal to 21. So once again, that's very similar to P, but it's opposite because it uses the word not, so I put the squiggly line. And that's going to be the same thing as D. For 4, it says, let P represent two angles or vertical angles, let Q represent the angles are congruent. What is the symbolic representation of the following statement? If two angles are congruent, okay, well that's Q, and that's Q exactly, then the angles are vertical angles. And that's going to be P. Q, then P, which is going to be letter A. For the last one in this section, number 5, this is called a choose all that apply, or a drag and drop, sorry. Which case, if you have to take the SOL, you have to drag each response into the correct spot. All of them have to be correct in order for you to get any sort of credit. So we have let P represent angle A as acute, let Q represent angle B as acute, create the symbolic representation of the following arguments. A is acute if and only if. So we haven't really talked about that one, but if and only if is that biconditional statement that has the arrow going in both directions. A is acute is P. B is acute is Q. So that's going to be this statement right here. Instead of dragging and dropping, because I can't, I'm going to just rewrite it. I'm going to cross it out. Once you use it one time, you won't use it again. Then it says A is acute, so that's P. Or, so that's the down arrow, B is acute, Q. So that is located right here, P or Q. And I'm just going to rewrite it and cross it out. Therefore, that's the 3 dots. A is acute, so that is P. And B is acute, that is Q. Which is this option right here, P or Q. Okay. And those are all of the questions for language of logic. So let's take a look at the next page, which are conditional SOL questions. And this one only has 3. It says, which is a contrapositive of the statement below? Now, contrapositive is the same thing as converse and inverse. Now, as a review, converse switches and inverse negates. Alright, so we do both. We switch the hypothesis and the conclusion, and we negate both. So if I were to write the contrapositive statement, it would say, if you are not prepared for the test, then you do not do your homework. So let's see which one says that. If you are not prepared for the test, so it's not going to be A. If you are not prepared for your test, if you do your homework, not that one, if you do not do your homework. So just using the process of elimination, we're able to figure out that the answer is B. But let's just check and make sure that it actually does both parts. If you are not prepared for your test, then you did not do your homework. So notice how I switched both the hypothesis and the conclusion, and I added the word nots to make them negative. Now, number 2 says, what is the converse of the statement? Converse, as we already talked about, is when you switch the hypothesis and the conclusion. So the hypothesis is Joe goes fishing. The conclusion is he needs bait. So I'm just going to literally switch these two. If Joe needs bait, then he goes fishing. Or if he needs bait, then Joe goes fishing, which is going to be option A. And then our last question in this section says, which is the inverse of the following statement? So inverse negates both parts, but it keeps the hypothesis and the conclusion in the same order. So here our original statement is, if the measure of an angle is 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. We need to negate both parts. If the measure of an angle is not 90 degrees, then it is not a right angle, which is going to, once again, be A as our answer choice. Okay, so we have B, A, A. Now in our last section, we have deductive reasoning. Okay, so deductive reasoning is what the last topic that we talked about. For our review, it says, which set of statements represents an invalid argument, making it be that we can't use the law of syllogism or the law of deductive reasoning. So let's take a look at this problem. It says, which is an invalid argument, sorry. So A says, if I work, then I will make money. If I make money, then I will buy clothes. This right here is going to use the law of syllogism. So I'm going to cross out what repeats. So this statement does technically simplify to, if I work, then I will buy clothes. Then it says, if I work, then I will buy clothes. That is going to be your final answer. So that's good. That is a valid argument, but I'm looking for an invalid argument. If we pass geometry, then we will play sports. If we play sports, then we will get a trophy. So the concluding statement says, if we do not get a trophy, then we did not pass geometry. So if I cross out what repeats, we have, if we pass geometry, then we will get a trophy. That is not the concluding statement right here. However, this is the contrapositive statement, because I take my hypothesis and my conclusion and I switch them and I negate them. So this is still a valid argument because I'm using the law of syllogism and the law of contrapositive. For C, it says, if Mark goes camping, then he will go fishing. If Mark goes fishing, then he will buy bait. If Mark does not buy bait, then he will go camping. So let's see here. If I cross out what repeats, Mark goes fishing, then my statement should read, if Mark goes camping, then he will buy bait, which isn't exactly the statement that we have here. If we take a look, though, we do switch it and we negate one part, but we don't negate the other part. So this is looking a little suspicious. Let's skip this one for right now. D says, if it is your birthday, then you will get ice cream. If you get ice cream, then you will get cake. And the concluding statement says, if it is your birthday, then you will get cake. So if I cross out what repeats about the ice cream, our concluding statement should read, if it is your birthday, then you will get cake, which it does. Okay, so this is also a valid argument using the law of syllogism, which means C is going to be our invalid argument. Okay? Number 2 says, which is a valid conclusion, or which is a valid conclusion that can be drawn from these statements? If a quadrilateral is a rhombus, then it is a parallelogram. If a quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then its opposite angles are congruent. So this right here is using the law of syllogism again, where we cross out what repeats and we rewrite what's left over. So I'm going to cross out what repeats, and the concluding statement should say, if a quadrilateral is a rhombus, then its opposite angles are congruent, which means that we know a fact about rhombuses. We know that rhombuses, opposite angles are congruent. So let's see which one says that. Every quadrilateral is a rhombus. That's not true. Every parallelogram is a rhombus. That's not true. Opposite angles of a rhombus are congruent. That is true. Opposite angles of a quadrilateral are congruent. That is not true, not based off the law of syllogism. So C is going to be your answer. If we take a look at number 3, it says, assuming these statements are true, some musicians are happy people, all happy people like music. Which of the following is a valid conclusion? If I know that all happy people like music, and some musicians are happy people, I should be able to determine this is happy people, and some musicians are happy people, music, that all happy people are musicians. That's not true. That all musicians like music, that some happy people do not like music. Can't make that statement because it literally says all happy people like music. And some musicians like music. Alright, so we can make the assumption that some musicians like music because they overlap, but they don't overlap completely. So that's going to be the answer for number 3. For number 4, it says, in which group of statements is the conclusion not justified by the previous pair of statements? So this is very similar to number 1. All cooks work in the kitchen. Mary is a cook. Mary works in the kitchen. That is justified because if Mary is a cook, then she's going to work in the kitchen. All dinosaurs are extinct. A triceratops is a dinosaur. All triceratops are extinct. That is true because since a triceratops is a dinosaur, we can conclude that a triceratops is extinct. Just like if Mary is a cook, we know Mary works in the kitchen. For C, it says all squares are rectangles, all rectangles are parallelograms. So if we cross out what repeats, sort of using the law of syllogism there, we can conclude that all squares are parallelograms, which is a justified conclusion. Now usually the ones where you see the word num are going to be not justified, but let's go ahead and take a look. It says all fish live in the water, some snakes live in the water, some snakes are fish. That's not necessarily going to be true because snakes, we know, aren't fish. But just because they live in the water or do not live in the water doesn't change the type of species that they are. So this is not a justified statement based off the 2 previous statements. Now for our last one, number 5, it says consider the following arguments. If the first 2 statements are true, in which argument is the third statement an incorrect conclusion? So we have, if John studies, then he will pass the test. If John passes the test, then he will not be grounded. This uses the law of syllogism. So if we cross out what repeats, we should be able to conclude that if John studies, then he will not be grounded. If John is grounded, then he will study. That right here is not a valid conclusion because it's not using the law of syllogism properly and it's not using the law of contrapositive. So the answer should be A, but let's go ahead and check the rest of them. If it rains, then we will stay inside. If we stay inside, then we will play games. So I'm going to cross out what repeats. And the conclusion should be, if it rains, then we will play games, which is the conclusion that we reach in 3. So this is a valid conclusion or a correct conclusion. For C, it says, if we win the game, then we will win the championship. If we win the championship, then we will get a trophy. So if I cross out what repeats, the conclusion should say, if we win the game, then we will get a trophy. Now notice how it's not exactly in that order, but it's actually the contrapositive statement. If we do not get a trophy, then we did not win the game, which is still a valid conclusion that can be drawn. So that is not an incorrect conclusion. And then D says, if Susan eats her broccoli, then she will get ice cream. If Susan gets ice cream, then she will stay up late. If Susan eats, so if I cross out repeats, then she will get ice cream. If Susan gets ice cream, the concluding statements should say, if Susan eats her broccoli, then she will stay up late, which is the conclusion that's drawn. It is a valid conclusion or correct conclusion, so my answer for that is A. If you guys have any questions on these SOL packets, please let me know. Please send me an email. After this unit, the SOL packets will be for a grade. And like I said, they're all old SOL questions, so it's very good in preparation for if you have to take the SOL or even if you have to take the final exam. But like I said, if you have any questions, please let me know. Okay, I'll see you guys soon. Don't forget that you have your test next class. Bye.